restore our business processes according to international standards. PJB reliability and consistency in maintaining excellent operating performance has brought PJB power plants into the top 10% NERC and getting regional and international awards. Such achievements will always be improved as a step to make PJB as the leading and sustainable energy company in Southeast Asia. We are also committed to always innovate and develop in various company sectors, supported by our subsidiaries, associations, and affiliates in PJB Group. We provide the best and integrated services to ensure your power plant unit performance reliable and efficient, based on the spirit of akhlaq: trust, competent, harmonic, loyal, adaptive, and collaborative. We come from Indonesia and for the world. Our spirit created for you. Being your choice is our pride. Fulfill your needs is our spirit.
PT Pembangkitan Jawa Bali sebagai anak usaha PT PLN lebih dari 25 tahun berkarya di industri ketenagalistrikan nasional. Mengelola lebih dari 20.000 megawatt telah menjadikan kami sebagai perusahaan pembangkitan energi listrik terbesar, terdepan, dan terbaik di Indonesia. Proses bisnis yang kami jalankan didukung dengan peralatan, kompetensi, serta keahlian hingga sistem terintegrasi yang menghadirkan kualitas produk yang handal, efisien, dan terpercaya. Keunggulan tersebut kami tawarkan kepada Anda dalam beberapa bentuk layanan, antara lain EAM atau Enterprise Asset Management sebagai solusi dalam menstandarisasi proses pengelolaan pembangkit yang terintegrasi. Dilakukan secara terpusat, EAM PJB dipercaya menjadi layanan untuk mengefisienkan operasional pada unit pembangkit dan memberikan informasi yang lebih cepat untuk pengambilan keputusan. Dengan dua fitur utama seperti EAM Kit yang mengimplementasikan tata kelola pembangkit melalui metode pengampingan dengan aplikasi IBM Maximo dan SAP, serta Maturity Level Assessment untuk mengukur tingkat kesiapan atau kematangan unit. PJB EAM siap membawa pengelolaan pembangkit Anda ke level berikutnya. iCore atau Intelligent Center of Optimization Reliability and Efficiency merupakan sebuah terobosan dari PJB yang menggunakan sistem pengelolaan pembangkit berbasis digital 4.0 dengan memanfaatkan AI, IoT, Big Data, serta Cloud Computing yang bertujuan untuk pengelolaan pembangkit yang lebih efisien dan efektif. Sejak diluncurkan pada tahun 2016 dan menjadi pionir di industri ketenagalistrikan di Indonesia, iCore terus berkembang hingga pada tahun 2020 sudah terdapat sekitar 14 pembangkit yang tersentralisasi pada sistem iCore. MRO atau Maintenance Repair Overhaul merupakan salah satu layanan prima dari PJB yang secara efektif dapat memastikan reliabilitas dan kinerja komponen pembangkit ataupun komponen dari industri utilitas lainnya. Layanan MRO yang dipersembahkan oleh PJB terbukti dapat menjaga performa mesin, memperbaiki kondisi mesin yang mengalami kerusakan, serta menjembatani pelanggan dengan para expert PJB untuk mendapatkan pemantauan atau evaluasi kondisi mesin secara berkala. IPP atau Independent Power Producer. Seiring rekam jejak lebih dari 25 tahun di industri ketenagalistrikan, PJB terus mengukir sejarah di Indonesia melalui pengembangan berbagai megaproyek. PJB telah melakukan berbagai strategic partnership, baik dengan perusahaan berskala nasional maupun skala internasional. Hal ini dibuktikan dengan hadirnya PLTU Jawa 7, yang merupakan PLTU terefisien di Indonesia dengan teknologi USC boiler, hingga PLTS Terapung Cirata, yang menjadi PLTS terapung kapasitas terbesar di Asia Tenggara. melalui kompetensi yang menyeluruh, mulai dari operation and maintenance, engineering, procurement and construction, hingga penyediaan suku cadang, membuat PJB menjadi partner pengembangan pembangkit nomor 1 di Indonesia yang terintegrasi dan tentunya siap mendunia. Green Energy menyongsong tren energi hijau sebagai energi masa kini dan masa depan. PJB siap melakukan terobosan dengan Green Energy. Melalui terobosan yang dihasilkan oleh expert EBT PJB, PLTS terapung 145 MW Cirata, dan pemasangan panel surya pada SPB KLU Bali, PJB akan membawa green energy pada masyarakat luas, atau proyek terobosan co-firing di Indonesia dengan memanfaatkan biomasa pada PLTU berskala besar. Dengan layanan solar rooftop yang mencakupi instalasi, pemeliharaan, dan penyediaan suku cadang, serta pada co-firing PLTU yang mencakupi konsultasi dan pengoperasiannya. Energi yang lebih hijau siap menjadi bagian dari kelistrikan di Indonesia. Learn, dengan berbagai pengalaman dan keahlian yang kami miliki, kami menawarkan pembelajaran strategis dan penggerak utama terpercaya dalam mengelola pengembangan kompetensi. Pembelajaran, pelatihan, dan sertifikasi kami lakukan dengan menggunakan strategi pembelajaran perusahaan yang berfokus pada energi listrik. PJB hadir dengan semangat perubahan nyata dan siap membangun bangsa melalui ketenagalistrikan. PJB Ultimate Services, your business solutions.
As the dynamics of life turning so fast, the needs for energy has become a non-stopping demands. PT Pembangkitan Jawa Bali, subsidiaries of PT PLN Persero, comes as an integrated total solution for power generation. We are experienced in managing more than 20,000 megawatts, consisting of different types of power plants, with total assets of more than $12 billion. We are also experienced in engineering, procurement, and construction of 117 megawatt power plants, 1,370 megavolt ampere transmission generators, and more than 900 circuit kilometer transmission lines. With the vision to be a leading and reliable company in sustainable energy business in Southeast Asia, we are implementing integrated management system ISO 55001 and ISO 37001 that ensure our business processes according to international standards. PJB reliability and consistency in maintaining excellent operating performance has brought PJB power plants into the top 10% NERC and getting regional and international awards. Such achievements will always be improved as a step to make PJB as the leading and sustainable energy company in Southeast Asia. We are also committed to always innovate and develop in various company sectors, supported by our subsidiaries, associations, and affiliates in PJB Group. We provide the best and integrated services to ensure your power plant unit performance reliable and efficient, based on the spirit of akhlaq, trust, competent, harmonic, loyal, adaptive, and collaborative. We come from Indonesia and for the world. Our spirit created for you. Being your choice is our pride. Fulfill your needs is our spirit.
PT Pembangkitan Jawa Bali sebagai anak usaha PT PLN lebih dari 25 tahun berkarya di industri ketenagalistrikan nasional. Mengelola lebih dari 20.000 megawatt telah menjadikan kami sebagai perusahaan pembangkitan energi listrik terbesar, terdepan, dan terbaik di Indonesia. Proses bisnis yang kami jalankan didukung dengan peralatan, kompetensi, serta keahlian hingga sistem terintegrasi yang menghadirkan kualitas produk yang handal, efisien, dan terpercaya. Keunggulan tersebut kami tawarkan kepada Anda dalam beberapa bentuk layanan, antara lain EAM atau Enterprise Asset Management sebagai solusi dalam menstandarisasi proses pengelolaan pembangkit yang terintegrasi. Dilakukan secara terpusat, EAM PJB dipercaya menjadi layanan untuk mengefisienkan operasional pada unit pembangkit dan memberikan informasi yang lebih cepat untuk pengambilan keputusan. Dengan dua fitur utama seperti EAM Kit yang mengimplementasikan tata kelola pembangkit melalui metode pengampingan dengan aplikasi IBM Maximo dan SAP, serta Maturity Level Assessment untuk mengukur tingkat kesiapan atau kematangan unit. PJB EAM siap membawa pengelolaan pembangkit Anda ke level berikutnya. iCore atau Intelligent Center of Optimization Reliability and Efficiency merupakan sebuah terobosan dari PJB yang menggunakan sistem pengelolaan pembangkit berbasis digital 4.0 dengan memanfaatkan AI, IoT, Big Data, serta Cloud Computing yang bertujuan untuk pengelolaan pembangkit yang lebih efisien dan efektif. Sejak diluncurkan pada tahun 2016 dan menjadi pionir di industri ketenagalistrikan di Indonesia, iCore terus berkembang hingga pada tahun 2020 sudah terdapat sekitar 14 pembangkit yang tersentralisasi pada sistem iCore. MRO atau Maintenance Repair Overhaul merupakan salah satu layanan prima dari PJB yang secara efektif dapat memastikan reliabilitas dan kinerja komponen pembangkit ataupun komponen dari industri utilitas lainnya. Layanan MRO yang dipersembahkan oleh PJB terbukti dapat menjaga performa mesin, memperbaiki kondisi mesin yang mengalami kerusakan, serta menjembatani pelanggan dengan para expert PJB untuk mendapatkan pemantauan atau evaluasi kondisi mesin secara berkala. IPP atau Independent Power Producer. Seiring rekam jejak lebih dari 25 tahun di industri ketenagalistrikan, PJB terus mengukir sejarah di Indonesia melalui pengembangan berbagai megaproyek. PJB telah melakukan berbagai strategic partnership, baik dengan perusahaan berskala nasional maupun skala internasional. Hal ini dibuktikan dengan hadirnya PLTU Jawa 7, yang merupakan PLTU terefisien di Indonesia dengan teknologi USC boiler, hingga PLTS Terapung Cirata, yang menjadi PLTS terapung kapasitas terbesar di Asia Tenggara. Melalui kompetensi yang menyeluruh, mulai dari operation and maintenance, engineering, procurement and construction, hingga penyediaan suku cadang, membuat PJB menjadi partner pengembangan pembangkit nomor 1 di Indonesia yang terintegrasi dan tentunya siap mendunia. Green Energy menyongsong tren energi hijau sebagai energi masa kini dan masa depan. PJB siap melakukan terobosan dengan Green Energy. Melalui terobosan yang dihasilkan oleh expert EBT PJB, PLTS Terapung 145 MW Cirata, dan pemasangan panel surya pada SPB KLU Bali, PJB akan membawa Green Energy pada masyarakat luas, atau proyek terobosan co-firing di Indonesia dengan memanfaatkan biomasa pada PLTU berskala besar. Dengan layanan solar rooftop yang mencakupi instalasi, pemeliharaan, dan penyediaan suku cadang, serta pada co-firing PLTU yang mencakupi konsultasi dan pengoperasiannya. Energi yang lebih hijau siap menjadi bagian dari kelistrikan di Indonesia. Learn, dengan berbagai pengalaman dan keahlian yang kami miliki, kami menawarkan pembelajaran strategis dan penggerak utama terpercaya dalam mengelola pengembangan kompetensi. Pembelajaran, pelatihan, dan sertifikasi kami lakukan dengan menggunakan strategi pembelajaran perusahaan yang berfokus pada energi listrik. PJB hadir dengan semangat perubahan nyata dan siap membangun bangsa melalui ketenagalistrikan. PJB Ultimate Services, your business solutions.
As the dynamics of life turning so fast, the needs for energy has become a non-stopping demands. PT Pembangkitan Jawa Bali, subsidiaries of PT PLN Persero, comes as an integrated total solution for power generation. We are experienced in managing more than 20,000 megawatts, consisting of different types of power plants, with total assets of more than 12 billion US dollars. We are also experienced in engineering, procurement, and construction of 117 megawatt power plants, 1,370 megavolt ampere transmission generators, and more than 900 circuit kilometer transmission lines. With the vision to be a leading and reliable company in sustainable energy business in Southeast Asia, we are implementing integrated management system ISO 55001 and ISO 37001 that ensure our business processes according to international standards. PJB reliability and consistency in maintaining excellent operating performance has brought PJB power plants into the top 10% NERC and getting regional and international awards. Such achievements will always be improved as a step to make PJB as the leading and sustainable energy company in Southeast Asia. We are also committed to always innovate and develop in various company sectors, supported by our subsidiaries, associations, and affiliates in PJB Group. We provide the best and integrated services to ensure your power plant unit performance reliable and efficient, based on the spirit of akhlaq, trust, competent, harmonic, loyal, adaptive, and collaborative. We come from Indonesia and for the world. Our spirit created for you. Being your choice is our pride. Fulfill your needs is our spirit.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Greetings to all of us. Welcome to PJB Connect 2021. The Honorable of the Board of Directors of PJB, PT PJB, the Honorable of the Board of Directors of PT PJB subsidiaries, the Honorable Mr. Ernst Kuneman as International Carbon Active Action Partnership, the Honorable Ms. Aryani Amelina as Environment and Climate Program Specialist of UNICEF, the Honorable Mr. Mariono as General Manager of PT PJB Python Power Plant, the Honorable Mr. Indratno Pardiansyah as the Moderator, and all of the participants who accepting the invitation. Thank you for participating in this event. Such a pleasure to meet again in the 2021 PJB Connect series, welcoming PJB's 26th anniversary and 76th National Electricity Day. PJB again present the PJB Connect exhibition. The PJB Connect 2021 activities consist of the exhibition and Conference on Technology and Electricity Products. To inform you, this year's PJB Connect is the sixth event since it was first held in 2016. This event will take place on 22 until 29 October of 2021, which today is the last day of the conference, where you can all enjoy the virtual exhibition and e-conference by accessing www.pjbconnect.com. First, we would like to invite all of the audience to use the virtual background and fill in the attendance list provided by the committee in the chat room. Participants can also ask questions through the chat, and there will be interesting door prize for those of you who are lucky. So before we start, I would like to invite all of the audience to sing the national anthem. Thank you for your time. I would like to invite Mr. Iwan Purwana as Development and Commerce Director of PT PJB to give an opening speech for today. To Mr. Iwan Purwana, if you may please.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good afternoon, everyone. The Honorable Mr. Ens Kuneman, Climate Change Specialist at the International Carbon Action Partnership. Ibu Aryani Amalina, Environment and Climate Program Specialist at UNICEF. Mas Mariono, General Manager of PT PJB at Python Power Plant, and all of audience, those come in this event for accepting the invitation. Thank you to each of you being here with us today. Before begin, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to all of you who generously help us make this event a success. In commemoration of the 26th anniversary of PT Pembangkitan Jawa Bali, we are proud to be able to hold this conference today as one of the events at PJB Connect 2021. Today, PJB is holding a conference on decarbonization for the future economy. Recently, the RUPTL 2021 to 2030 has been ratified. This is a greener RUPTL than before because the portion of the addition of new and renewable power plant is 51.6%, larger than the addition of fossil generation of 48.4%. Ladies and gentlemen, along with this issue, the government has concern on decarbonizing up to zero carbon from the energy sector. Therefore, the Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry has conducted a carbon trading pilot project for coal-fired power plant. Carbon trade is the practice of buying and selling credit that permit a company or other entity to emit a certain amount of carbon dioxide. Carbon trade agreements allow for the sale of credits to emit carbon dioxide between nations as a part of international agreement aimed at gradually reducing total emission. The pilot project has involved 32 coal-fired power plants, where the government has managed to make carbon transfer transaction through a carbon trading system. They have conducted trial runs under a voluntary scheme since early 2021 to prepare compulsory carbon emission trading system scheduled for 2025. It is an opportunity for PJB and PLN Group to examine the system in the further in order to attract more clean investor or financial institution to have a collaboration in developing clean energy project. Ladies and gentlemen, we hope this conference can encourage us to be ready on implementing the carbon trading system in Indonesia. Thank you so much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you for the speech, Mr. Iwan. As we'll continue, I would like to invite the speakers and the moderators to take photos together first. Okay, we'll take a photo together on my cue. We posing with thumbs up. Okay, on my cue, 3, 2, 1. Okay, thank you so much. To proceed to the main event, please let me introduce the speakers for today. The first speaker, Ms. Aryani Amelia, as Environment and Climate Program Specialist of UNICEF. Good afternoon, ma'am. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Okay, the second speaker, Mr. Ernst Kuhneman from the International Carbon Action Partnership. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. Thank you for the invite. It's great to be here.
Okay, thank you so much. The third speaker, Mr. Mariono, as General Manager of PT PJB Python Power Plant. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you. Fine.
Okay. And also the moderator for today, Mr. Indratno Pardiansyah. Good afternoon, sir. How are you?
Good afternoon, Ms. Fania. Thank you.
Okay, thank you
nice
so
to
much.
see you.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much to all of the inspirational and extraordinary speakers for being here to share your insight and knowledge to the audience about today's theme, decarbonization for the future economy. So next, entering the main session of this conference, I would like to invite the moderator to guide the activities. So for Mr. Indratno, if you may please.
All right. Thank you, Ms. Fania. Okay, very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending PJB Connect 2021. For today's session is the last session of webinar PJB Connect 2021. And for today's discussion will be very interesting. Maybe some of you already knows about the definition of carbon trading or the system. So for today's discussion, we will focus with the expert from the international expert and also for the local expert about the carbon trading. So before we proceed to our main discussion, maybe have you ever thought about why we have to put a price on carbon and why do many government and business leaders support it? Maybe there are several paths government can take to price a carbon, all leading to the same result. First, they begin to capture what are known as the external cost of a carbon emission, that cost that the public pays for in other ways. So for this one, let's hear from the expert for the first time. From the first speaker, I would like to invite Ms. Aryani Amelina, a specialist from climate change from the UNICEF, to explain what is actually carbon trading and what the impact for the decarbonization. Please, Ms. Aryani.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Pak Indratno. Thank you, Bapak sekalian dari PT PJB. Good afternoon, Ernst from Adelphi. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to speak in this event, PJB Connect, and shed some inputs or insights on the decarbonization issue and the climate crisis. So as I'm the first speaker in the panel, I will touch upon the background of why we need to have a carbon pricing and why we need to go through the decarbonization process and what in general is happening or we are facing now in terms of carbon pricing policy in Indonesia. I hope then you will be further informed about the carbon pricing and ETS systems as a whole by the second speakers and the way forward by the last speaker. So my name is Aryani. Currently, I'm working at the UNICEF Indonesia office on the Environment and Climate Program. I also have 7 years of experience working in carbon pricing and climate policies before the current position that I'm holding now. In this context, I would like to try to combine the different perspectives of climate resilience, climate impact, especially on vulnerable communities, and also decarbonization and carbon pricing in the context of climate resilience. I will share my screen, and I hope you can see it now. Okay. So carbon pricing, decarbonization, and climate resilience. I would like to just bring your attention again to the current situation of the climate crisis. We have noticed the greenhouse gas emissions still continue to rise despite a short decline during the due to the pandemic situation. In this picture, you will see the information monitored by BMKG, the Indonesian Meteorology, Climatology, and Geophysics Agency, that shows that our Indonesia's own greenhouse gas emissions continue to rise and quite close to the global CO2 or greenhouse gas emissions that is observed in the international monitoring points. In the last information we have in this year, in the middle of the year, it shows that our greenhouse gas emissions is very close to the global one. And in the recent years, particularly in the years where we see forest fires in the Kalimantan or Sumatra area, our greenhouse gas emissions peak above the global emissions, as you can see here, the concentration harder to reduce our to ensure that we are to ensure that we are not going to miss our climate targets. If we don't do this, ambient air temperature will continue to rise even further. we already now see the information, the data, the observation also by BMKG that ambient air temperature continues to rise. There are extreme heat occurring everywhere in the world, including in Indonesia. And again, the ambient air temperature rise of Indonesia and globally are quite similar. Is between 1 and 1.2 degree increase. And last year, the year 2020 was the year when the highest temperature was ever recorded since the pre-industrial revolution. This ambient air temperature increase will be faced by Indonesia in all of its region. Again, the data from BMKG shows us that these points, these red and yellow points show the trends in ambient temperature increase, and you will see different locations that have higher than average or higher than others increase. But in general, you can see already the yellow points everywhere in the country, and even the red points everywhere. And it shows that this is a challenge that we all will face no matter where we live in the country. Increased rainfall will also will be happening, and due to this increased rainfall, more intense rainfall, more longer periods of rainfall can cause major floods. This flood is not a new challenge for Indonesia in many urban locations, particularly, but we are seeing more and more major floods or big floods happening around the country in urban and also rural areas. This can cause a loss of livelihoods, loss of homes, loss of lives, and even loss of children's lives. The physical economic losses will be higher than what we are already seeing in 1 year. We are losing 30 trillion Indonesian rupiah due to disasters, natural disasters that will be exacerbated or made intensified and more frequent by climate change. Due to this situation globally and in Indonesia, we know that everyone in Indonesia is at risk, but children are the most disproportionately affected. UNICEF this year published a research study report, The Climate Crisis, which say the climate crisis is a child rights crisis. We published a climate risk index specific for children, and we found that children in Indonesia are at a high risk of climate change. The issue, this challenge, climate change will affect children in the different ways, including affecting sectors that they depend the most. Health system, health facilities, nutrition, the availability of food, nutritious foods, and the stability of the food system. Water and sanitation, the availability of water, the safety of water, the quality of water, and also sanitation facilities, toilets, latrines, and other facilities. Education facilities, children facing disasters or unbearable heat will facing challenge in learning, in going to school, and schools can be even closed due to different disasters. As we know, these past 2 years, children have lost the opportunity to learn at school, learning at the optimal approach, optimal way, and this can be a challenge that we see in the future due to more frequent disasters. This also is a challenge for ensuring their safety and protection, and even made worse if they lose their parents. Children that lose their parents will lose their most direct and more secure safety nets, and therefore the government needs to provide more secure and stronger safety nets. Children are more vulnerable than adults. As we can imagine, their bodies are not yet fully developed. Their brains are not yet fully developed. Their strength to extreme temperature, to diseases, to factors, to air pollution is not as strong as adults. This is why children will be affected the worst. And this is why we need to put a different approach and a stronger approach for children. And above all, climate change will affect them, children and adolescents, throughout their life. So children who are born today, children who are toddlers today will face climate change throughout their life. And if we don't do anything to decarbonize and to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and increase climate resilience, they will face an even stronger effect throughout their life, from the moment they were born until the moment they become adults and become a part of the economy and part of the nation's development. One of the ways, or one of the policies developed by the government of Indonesia in ensuring that this does not happen and in doing more to combat climate change is to publish or to develop its commitment to the global level, called the Nationally Determined Contributions and Long-Term Strategy excuse me, to the United Nations. And at the national level, the local development strategies we have led by Bappenas, the Low Carbon Development and Climate Resilient Development documents. In the NDC, I hope most of the people in this webinar today already know that we, as Indonesia, have a commitment to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, 29% below business as usual emissions with domestic resources, and 41%, it can go up to 41% below business as usual with international support that can come through different ways, financing, capacity building, technologies, and others. But we have not frequently heard, and in fact is quite a new development under the NDC, that we also have an NDC commitment on climate adaptation. So in the most updated NDC published and submitted by the government to the United Nations in July 2021 this year, the government has provided a more comprehensive and more detailed plan on how to build climate resilience and adaptation to climate change. This document, the NDC and the Low Carbon Development, Climate Resilient Development mention that we will increase climate resilience on economic, social, and livelihood and ecosystems and landscape sectors. This is to protect us, protect ourselves, protect our children, and protect our environment to ensure that they provide us with the lives that we deserve in the future. What needs more to be done after we have these policies? We need to implement, of course, after we have a plan and a commitment. We need to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We need to invest in climate adaptation and resilience. We need to involve all parties in this effort, support the participation of all people, vulnerable communities, indigenous people, young people, people who needs more skills building in rural areas and even in urban areas. We need them to be involved in climate change actions, in sustainable energy, which is something that is very close to the heart of PJB, and involve them in the decision-making processes. We need to utilize various mechanisms. We cannot rely only on one policy, for example. This is why the government, one of the reason government developed the policy or set the economic value of carbon policy. Carbon pricing is one of the mechanisms to prevent climate change becoming more severe and to induce more reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Very recently in this year, the government published its plan to implement a carbon tax starting next year in April 2022. And going to be piloted or applied first to the electricity generation sector. This is a cap and tax system. So there are different types of carbon tax. Maybe Mr. Ernst will explain later, but we have fuel tax, pajak pada bahan bakar. We have a cap and tax. So essentially, if a facility, let's say an electricity generation facility, emits greenhouse gas emissions that is above what the government set as a limit, that additional or excessive emissions are going to be taxed. This is what we already have as part of the bigger Indonesian tax rule or regulation, and also is a part of a comprehensive carbon pricing policy that the government is developing. This is being still developed as the latest information tells us. It's being developed, carbon pricing policy as a presidential regulation. and it includes different types of carbon pricing policies and mechanisms. So in the plan, we have cap and trade that is currently also being piloted. We have a carbon offsetting policy or program, including carbon offsetting for voluntary purpose, and also result-based payment, which is paying a company or an entity, an organization, once they have succeeded in reducing their emissions. So these four mechanisms are hopefully going to be implemented in the future, although we don't know yet the details about who will be subject to what and how much the emissions limit will be for the other, for example, the carbon, the cap and trade. We have the pilot now, but we have not seen in public the cap of the emissions that will be set. Together, these carbon pricing mechanisms need to be clear in terms of connection between each other. So we now see the carbon tax policy being released first, while the others are being still developed. And in the roadmap towards this carbon pricing policy implementation, we need to ensure the development takes into account the different mechanisms between each other and make sure they are compatible with each other, so they don't overlap in the sectors, they don't overlap in terms of obligations, there is no multiple ways of reporting, and there is no and the one also important thing is that the carbon price is sufficient. So you may have heard that the carbon tax price is currently 30,000 rupiah per ton CO2 emissions. This is a start that the government decides, and going forward, it is likely, I will say, the price will be increased, although we don't know the timeline yet. It's also likely the government will set a longer time frame for the increase of the price to keep the business sector stable. But in my personal point of view, we need to have a higher carbon tax to ensure that we keep decarbonization ambitious and also bring more revenues for climate resilience. We will see in the future how this will be, and I hope the carbon tax implementation in the beginning of the 2022 will be smooth and with clear communications and also stakeholder communication to ensure that there is no the transition is good and smooth. And I also think that the capacity building is important in terms of staff and reporting frameworks to make sure that the carbon tax system runs smoothly and the taxation collection itself can be monitored by the public. Carbon tax is a very much a way to increase private sector action to decarbonize themselves and to find ways to innovate, and also to bring more efficiency to the process and to consider fuel switching and investing in different kinds of resources. This is a long game, we call it. It's a long-term process, decarbonization, and I would strongly suggest all private sectors today in the country to start thinking about how it will be participating in this decarbonization process, because as time goes, I can imagine that these carbon pricing policies will be also applied to other sectors, not only the electricity generation. So for all sectors, I would suggest these steps. First, it is very important for businesses itself to realize what climate change can do to the business, and we can do this through climate risk assessment. And related to that, conduct the sustainability or ESG assessments and consider how climate action can be strengthened. Invest in new and renewable energy, including facilitating off-grid electricity in locations that need it the most, including going back, for example, off-grid electricity in schools, in hospitals, and other social services. Ultimately, participate in carbon pricing and carbon tax mechanisms. Be prepared for the transparency and reporting framework, and very importantly, ensure accountability of the tax payment. So the the way the tax is derived should be protecting the consumer. And lastly, we have frequently heard about company social responsibility, corporate social responsibility. This is also a time of transformation of that CSR schemes into building resilience of community and social sectors on climate change, including through different partnership programs and multi-stakeholder cooperation. I will stop there and thank you again for the company, the PJB, for inviting me and for the other panelists. Thank you for listening to the participants and have a good day.
All right, thank you very much for Ms. Aryani Amelina for a very interesting explanation regarding the effect of the climate change, not only for physical, it's only to economic also, and another what needs to be done to prevent the climate change itself. Next, we will proceed for another detailed information regarding the carbon trading system implementation and also the definition itself. I would like to invite Ernst Kuneman, the climate specialist from the International Carbon Action Partnership. Ernst, time is yours.
Yeah, thanks so much, Indra, and warm welcome to all of you. It's great to be here today. So my name is Ernst Kuneman. I work as a project manager at the International Carbon Action Partnership, which is an international forum that brings together governments in order to advance emissions trading systems, share best practices, and generally share knowledge and sort of see how those instruments can really play or are already playing an important role in decarbonizing industry sectors. So my role there, I focus mainly on a range of carbon pricing design and implementation issues. And I specifically focus on how to make carbon pricing especially effective in the electricity and industry sectors, as there are various interactions that must be considered for carbon pricing to really deliver the incentives that it is intended to do. I'm based in Berlin, but I'm currently joining you from Amsterdam. And let me briefly share my slides with you here. Can you all see my screen?
Yeah, it's good. Maybe you can make it slow, a slide slow, yeah. All right.
All right. So yeah, about ICAP, we're an international forum. I think a couple of things that we also do is we share best practices. We facilitate linking of carbon markets and provide in-depth assessments. And we provide capacity building courses to countries currently considering the implementation of emissions trading systems. Now, for today's inputs, I'll start with a brief focus on the prominence, the potential of emissions trading in the power sector. I'll then provide a brief overview on the potential or sort of the mechanisms of emissions trading in a liberalized power market. That's of course sketches a different situation than what we currently see in Indonesia, but it is important to see how the instrument interacts in order to ensure that it can also be highly effective in more regulated sectors that we often see in Asia, including in Indonesia. And I will share close with some concluding thoughts. So why emissions trading? An emissions trading instrument places a quantity constraint on emissions, which is consistent with the carbon budget approach. And by doing so, it creates certainty over the emissions reductions pathway over the long run. And this makes it crucially different from a carbon tax, which creates more certainty on the price level that you impose on emitters. And both have their pros and cons. For the electricity sector, I would say the most important feature is that there is a carbon price signal, whether it comes from an ETS or carbon tax, that depends on broader considerations. Now, an emissions trading system can achieve emissions reductions at least cost. And this also distinguishes it from a carbon tax, as you essentially create a market for emissions with tradable certificates, allowing market participants to trade allowances. And the key potential there for an ETS is that it can really incentivize emissions reductions at the lowest cost possible. And it sets in place a clear reduction pathway and thereby communicates to investors the investments that will be necessary over the long run and those that should not be part of investment portfolios any longer. So in the power sector, an ETS can deliver three things in particular, which is low carbon production. It may also incentivize low carbon consumption and in particular low carbon investment. Now there's also potential for an ETS to drive innovation, essentially being part of a broader framework aimed at in sort of steering innovation towards low carbon technologies and processes. So let's move on to how an ETS can work or how it should work and always mostly works in liberalized power markets. First of all, why do we use emissions trading systems in the power sector? Well, mainly because the power sector is kind of the ideal sector for coverage under a carbon pricing instrument. It has few large fossil fuel-based emitters. There are very clear installation boundaries, which facilitates the monitoring, reporting, and verification procedure. And importantly, reducing emissions from the power sector is generally cheaper than in other sectors, since market-ready low-carbon technologies are available. And simply, reducing emissions from the power sector is highly important. It remains the single largest source of emissions worldwide, despite declining emissions in some regions. And it is also to play a major role in decarbonizing the heat and transport sectors going forward. So in a liberalized power sector, we find the following elements. Overall, generation supply networks are unbundled. There's competition in wholesale and retail markets. There are independent regulators that are assigned to monitor the market. Electricity is traded in wholesale markets, so price discovery is essentially decentralized. There are no regulated wholesale prices. Generators have free access to the market, which the independent regulators are ensuring. And when retail markets are fully liberalized, customers are free to choose their electricity supplier. So you may have seen this merit order curve depicted on the right here, which indicates that generation technologies are competing with one another based on their marginal costs, based on their operational cost expenditures. Now, why is this important? In such a policy environment, introducing ETS will have the following effect. If you introduce a carbon price, and this, whether it's an ETS or carbon tax, the operational expenditures, the variable cost components of generators will increase relative to their emissions intensity. So what happens for a given carbon price, the variable cost component for the carbon intensive plant will rise more relative to its low carbon counterparts. And under a sufficiently high carbon price, it will lead to the well-known fuel switching effect. And this you can see on the right here, essentially meaning that gas, which initially was more expensive than coal due to its higher fuel cost component, now becomes more competitive. Then what happens is that the load factors of the most emissions intensive units decline, meaning that for a specific amount of demand, you will use less of your most carbon intensive units, and thereby you generate direct emission savings. And this is an important effect of an ETS or carbon tax, as it lays at the core of how such a principle works in the electricity market, and it really opens up a broader range of abatement incentives, not just relating to production, but also to investment. And we will come back to that in a second. Now, why is this important? Because it indicates that there are basically two important conditions for a carbon price to work in the electricity sector. One, when introducing a carbon price, it is important that generators can include the carbon cost component in their daily operations. So there must be some level of carbon cost passed through, meaning that carbon intensive units are able to recover those costs on the wholesale market. Second, there must be some kind of competition in the system to make sure that when carbon costs increase for a carbon intensive unit, it also stands to lose market share due to the fuel switching effect that we've seen just now. In regulated markets, those conditions are often not met, and there are specific regulations that you can think of to make sure that you can mimic this effect, and the ETS or carbon tax for that matter is effective. And we'll get back to that in a short bit. So in such a policy environment where the ETS is fully functional in the electricity market, there are a range of abatement incentives that producers will face. So on the production side, carbon intensive assets will run less as their load factor is reduced due to that fuel switching effect. But their assets, their net earnings will also decrease as the margins will go down as well. So the price that they receive and the differential between the cost that they have is going to be lower. Low carbon assets, on the opposite, will run more and their load factors will increase, as will their net earnings, as their margins will increase. So when a carbon intensive unit is called upon to supply electricity, the electricity price will be higher than in a situation where a carbon tax would not apply. Now, this would benefit low carbon assets as they will be able to reap higher margins. On the investment side, the rate of return of low carbon assets will increase because of exactly that mechanism. So you can expect more low carbon capacity to come to the grid. Investments in those technologies will become more profitable. At the same time, the net present value, so the incoming cash flows of carbon intensive assets are going down. So there will be an incentive to decommission them earlier than their complete life cycle. This may not always be feasible. For instance, when you have a very young coal plant, there's still a lot of outstanding debt and capital costs to be recovered. In that case, an ETS or carbon tax can also incentivize retrofitting to ensure that the carbon intensive assets can still play a role in sort of the provision of energy security in a way that is compatible with climate targets. And here you can think of carbon capture and storage, but also in retrofit investments that shift the main role of a carbon plant from providing baseload power to providing system flexibility services, such that the plant generates less electricity, but does so when it matters most. And very importantly, with a carbon price signal, you will essentially preclude additional investments in carbon intensive assets. And that is very important to reduce future emissions increases. Now, on the demand side, where carbon costs are fully reflected throughout the value chain, you will also incentivize improvements in energy efficiency, and under competitive retail markets, consumers will be inclined to shift towards low carbon consumption. So far for the liberalized power sector under an ETS. Now moving on to the regulated power markets. As we know, many countries that are considering ETSs do not have liberalized power markets in place. And there are a host, there's a broad array of different design options and power market designs that we see around the world, which can more or less be grouped in these categories that you see in the left. Importantly, different forms of electricity sector design will interact with the ETS in a way that may prevent or change how participants respond to the allowance price. So whenever it's not certain that these two conditions of cost pass-through and wholesale competitions are going to be met, policymakers and industry experts alike should consider the interactions that can be expected with the introduction of a carbon price and the additional regulations that may be needed to ensure the carbon tax or ETS is fully effective and leads to direct emissions savings. So what can you consider in a regulated power market? First of all, it is often likely that dispatch will not be based on pure economic criteria, but on broader economic costs, the average cost or broader criteria not directly related to daily marginal costs. In that case, a carbon price cannot drive the fuel switching element that we've seen earlier. And there will hence be no increased running hours for low carbon generation versus carbon intensive units. However, policymakers here can introduce what is called green dispatch, by which you, within the administrative dispatch mechanism, specifically look at the allowance cost of generators and use that as an indicator to rank generators to be called upon to deliver electricity to the grid. Now, doing that must be complemented by the second condition, namely that power generators are able to recover their costs. If their market share declines under a green dispatch formula, you do not want them to incur unrecoverable debt through a carbon tax. So what you should think of is to what extent the carbon cost component can be integrated in the regulated wholesale tariff. And once that's being done, you essentially have met these two conditions that we also see in liberalized markets. That is, there is some form of competition based on emissions, and allowance costs can be reflected. In some cases, however, carbon intensive units are regulated by so-called take or pay contracts, which means in cases where they are curtailed, for instance, through a green dispatch formula, they will still receive payment. Now, that may not be compatible with a carbon pricing instrument, as it kind of dampens the investment signal for low carbon assets. So careful consideration is needed there to ensure that carbon costs can be recovered, but there's no specific additional compensation for curtailed hours. And finally, on the retail side, we often see regulated retail prices across a range of jurisdictions, also in jurisdictions that have sort of regulated wholesale markets. And in those cases, a carbon price will not drive low carbon consumption. There are specific examples where countries have looked at covering indirect emissions under the ETS. For instance, this is being done in Korea, where you can then try to mimic some of those effects that you would have seen in sort of a fully liberalized market. Now, irrespective of power market design, whether you have a liberalized market or a regulated system, a carbon price will interact with the structure of the electricity market. For instance, the opportunities for fuel switching. Fuel switching generally depends on whether gas capacity is readily available. So in systems with a highly diversified fuel mix, where both coal is present, but also gas and renewables, a carbon price has high potential for short-term abatement gains, as it will essentially ensure clean dispatch effects where gas units are more efficiently utilized compared to coal or other carbon-intensive assets. Now, where coal is dominating the system and gas is relatively absent, the fuel switching potential is simply much lower. The other important aspect to consider there are the costs of fuel switching. So generally, the lower the cost differential between gas and coal, the lower the carbon price needed to incentivize a fuel switch. But if, say, a jurisdiction has very cheap domestically available coal, but would be reliant on expensive imported gas, the carbon price will be much higher to incentivize fuel switching. So there, the important consideration also becomes, how does a carbon price interact with existing fuel taxes or subsidies? And aligning them is really important for an effective functioning of the carbon price. The age profile of the fossil fleet is also an important consideration, as older plants are more likely to have recovered more of their investment costs compared to newer plants, which makes decommissioning less costly. So where a coal fleet is very young, very new, early decommissioning may simply not be economically feasible, but there the carbon price signal will push towards the direction of retrofitting. So those examples that we mentioned earlier, be it sort of efficiency increases, carbon capture storage, or catering more to flexibility needs of the system. But the age of the profile of the fossil fuel fleet is also important, as sort of the more older the asset profile, it's also more likely that the marginal generator is increasingly carbon intensive. And when that is the case, you may expect a bigger impact on electricity prices when they are fully passed through. And companion policies are critical. We already sort of looked at that issue of long-term contracts. So with take or pay contracts where remuneration and utilization rates are fixed, it will be important to bring in some additional flexibility there in order to align with the functioning of a carbon price signal. But there may also be other systems such as capacity remuneration mechanisms or phase-out policies, which will all interact with the carbon price. And this is very jurisdiction specific. So a few concluding thoughts. An ETS will generally be most effective in liberalized and competitive power systems, but they can be highly effective in regulated power markets as well, if careful considerations are being given to making sure that the price signal is reflected throughout the value chain. So environmental dispatch is one option. This can be complemented with indirect emissions coverage on the retail side. But whatever path is chosen, it is very important that in the end, the carbon cost component is recovered down at the end consumer. And that's important for the simple fact that when that is not the case, either the government will need to step in to make sure no debt is incurred along the value chain, providing subsidies, or you would actually run the risk of additional debt. And that is something you would want to avoid, which also opens the question as to sort of the public acceptability of carbon price increases. But fortunately, there are specific design elements within both carbon taxes and ETSs to provide rebates and ensure that sort of those hit hardest by a carbon price can be compensated through the revenues that the instrument brings. And thereby, you can ensure that the policies are progressive. I think I will leave it there. Thank you very much for staying with me for a quite technical presentation, perhaps. I'm looking forward to the discussion and more than happy to answer any incoming questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Ernst, for your detailed information regarding the carbon system. And yeah, as you already know that the carbon price also can stimulate a clean technology and market innovation and fueling a low carbon driver of economic growth. And the ETS also is more effective in a various market for the electric sector. Okay, next we would like to invite our next speaker, Mr. Mariono, the General Manager of PT PJB Python Power Plant, for next presentation regarding the implementation of carbon trading in Python Power Plant. Mr. Mariono, time is yours.
Okay, thank you, Pak Indra. Thank you, Pak Indra. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Excellency, Mr. Iwan Purwana, Development and Commerce Directors of PT PJB. Honorable to all of speakers today, Pak Mr. Ernst Guneman, Ms. Amelina, respectable to all attendants of this webinar. In this webinar, I want to conduct about climate action overview in our company and carbon trading offset implementation in our power station, decarbonization program of Python coal-fired power plant, and then roadmap for decarbonization in our power plant. That is clear, Pak Indra?
Yeah, it's good. Pak Mariono, you can proceed.
Okay. There is our team, IT members, to prepare this material. Number one is me, Mariono, and second one is Ms. Gusti Wadania, is environmental supervisor in Python Power Station, and Pak Anjara Dioso, environmental staff at PT PJB head office. Our presentation consists of 6 parts. Number one is a Python profile. Second one is climate action overview. Number 3, carbon trading and offset. And then Python's decarbonization programs. Number 4 is decarbonization roadmap, and then conclusion. There is our profile. Python Power Station located at East Java, eastern of Java Island. We operate 2 times 400 megawatts. We operate since 1993, 1994. And in the Java Bali grid, is we contribute around 3.3%, and in East Java region we are about 8%. Until now, since 2020, our power station conduct the co-firing, of biomass with coal to operate our power plant. This is our award. There is proper. Code proper is from the Ministry of Environment. We 3 times hold the code proper 2017, 18, and 19. Subroto Award mean in efficiency energy and electricity safety. We held 4 times, I mean, 2018, 19, 20, and 21. In zero accident, from Ministry of Labor from 2012 until 2020. SMK 3 good flag from Ministry of Labor from 2012 to until 2019. And this one is the award as CSR, Indonesian Sustainability Development Goals Award. From 2018, 19, and the newest in 2021. There is our performance in the last 5 years. From every years we meet the standard of ENERC, North American Electric Reliability Council, based on the US. In the last 5 years, we meet exceed the standard of top 10 NERC. Our emission status in 2020, greenhouse gas. Hello, Pak Indra.
Yeah, yes, Pak Mariono is still on.
Okay. Our emission status is below the greenhouse gases intensity from the Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources. Is in number 1 is 0.96 CO2 per megawatt hours, and in number 2 is 0.95. We have carbon quota is around 136,000 ton CO2 equivalent, and in number 2 we have carbon quota about 154,000 ton CO2. In PJB, we can introduce to you all of attendants. This is our company. PT PJB is a subsidiary of PT PLN Persero, state-owned electricity company, established in 1995 This is our subsidiaries, grant subsidiary.
Pak Mariono, excuse me, you are mute. Maybe you can unmute now.
Yeah. Okay. And until now, we operate around 20,000 megawatt of in the various area in all Indonesia, from Aceh to Maluku. And this one is our award, from the Ministry of Environment, and then the various type of power plant we operate: hydro, solar PV, and so on. Related regulation about the carbonization is Undang-Undang number 16, 2016, about Paris Agreement, and then Perpres number 1, presidential regulation number 61, 2011, about the reduction of greenhouse gases per man from Ministry of Lingkungan Hidup, from Environmental Ministry of Environment number 72, 2017, and many regulation we can adopt to reference our operation of decarbonization. There is a target of national determined contribution energy sector in 2030. We should reduce GHG emission around 314 and 398. There is 2030 as the highest energy sector emission reduction in our national. There is RUPTL PLN 2001 and until 2030. There is the greenest RUPTL. According to PLN mission is menjalankan kegiatan usaha yang berwawasan lingkungan to conduct the business as environmental friendly. PLN has a policy to reduce GHG emission. Such number 1 is prioritizing to development of new and renewable energy. Number 2 is fuel switching and exhaust gas utilization. Is fuel switching, and the PLTU is carried out by replacing some of the coal fuel with biomass. Number 3 is utilization of biomass based fuel as an energy source. Number 4 is using low carbon and more efficient technology. PJB Climate Action Initiative is first one is a global warming adaptation, increasing power plant community resilience, adaptation to rising sea level. Number 2 is adaptation to increase an intake channel temperature for furniture usage. Number 3 is adaptation to increase disaster risk, like forest fires, tidal floods, and typhoons. And second one is climate change mitigation. Our mitigation program is company GHG inventory and mitigation project, ISO 14064. Number 2 is market-based carbon instrument. Number 3 is development of rooftop renewable energy and solar power. Number 4 is scale up biomass co-firing. Number 5 reforestation with productive trees. Number 6 CCUS or CCS. Number 7 is improve plant efficiency and digitalization. In carbon trading and offset in our power plant, especially in Python power station in 2020, our intensity is below the cap. Yeah, our intensity is 0.95 below the cap. In 2020, our tradable surplus is around 203 tons CO2 equivalent, and potential income is around 6 billion rupiah. There is our potential economy about carbon cap on Minister of Energy and Mineral Resources scheme. Python rose as a qualified power plant seller in an PSP pilot in 2021. In this graphic is an entity X that produces emission in excess to the cap is required to purchase an emission permit from an entity whose emission are still below the cap, or purchase an emission reduction certificate. And the next is in the right of the graphic. In the event that entity X is unable to purchase an emission permit or emission reduction certificate for emission above the full cap, the remaining emission will be subject to carbon tax. This is the next challenging to our carbon cap, trade, and tax from Minister of Treasury. And carbon trading in 2021, we trade our carbon from two power plants from the PLTU Rembang in Central Java, and then PLTU Tanjung Arwar in East Java. We can buy 500 tons CO2 both of this power plant, and totally we sell carbon around 1,000 tons CO2 from our power plant unit number 2. Python also was the first coal-fired power plant in PLN, which voluntarily carried out carbon offset to reduce greenhouse gases emission in Indonesia. This is the certificate of climate protection we conduct in 2020. Carbon offset program totally from unit number 2, we conduct 4 areas. Number 1 is from offset from Sipan Siaporas hydro power plant in carbon credit scheme-nya in VCS, voluntarily carbon system. It's about 1,000 tons CO2. Second one is in 18 August 2020 from Cirata Solar Power Plant. Carbon credit scheme is from PPE Renewable Energy. Our carbon offset around 207 tons CO2. Second one from low energy lighting and solar cell at Desa Kalianget near our power plant. And fourth one is Andung Biru mini hydro power plant from renewable energy as carbon offset around 416 tons CO2. Totally carbon offset in 2021 is 1,672 tons CO2. On the decarbonization program, PT PJB Python Power Station is the pioneering of coal firing. Our power plant officially operate biomass co-firing in June 2020. Until now, we operating around 5% of co-firing, and after we conduct a co-firing, then disseminate to other power plant to conduct co-firing too. We use the sawdust to biomass co-firing and we in this operation we reduce our emission reduction and so on. And in the social economy, we can try to increase the social economy of from the ring 1. This is biomass co-firing in our power plant documentation until September 2020. 21. Our production is around 44,000 megawatt hours, and total sodas consumed about 33,000 tons until September 2021. Sodas is from natural resources, so that's that used in Python 1 and 2 from wood industry waste, and located in near power plant and ring 1 and ring 2 areas. This is unloading process, and this one is mixing of sawdust and coal to feeding the boiler and operate the boiler. Co-firing burn test impact is positive impact to environmental. For example, is reducing the SO2 emission, reducing the NOx emission. And this one, biomass is carbon neutral, and sawdust waste utilization is natural resources used to operate our boiler. All the firing process is positive impact to our operational matters, like a boiler operation, environmental impact, there's positive impact to our power plant. There is a roadmap our co-firing unit number 1 and 2, yeah, and 0 until now 2021. We actually around 5% of co-firing biomass, and year by year we can increase this target. In the next, we have goal, we have target. Our power plant can switch to 100% of biomass co-firing, maybe in before 2030, our power plant can switch totally to co-firing.
Excuse me, Pak Mariono, your time is about 1 minute left, so maybe you can speed up to the conclusion, because after this we're going to have a Q&A session. Okay, thank you. Okay, this one is Andung Biru of Mini Hydro Power Station. And that one, our one of the CSR program from the our power plant. And this one is a PLT. Is a hydrokinetic power plant. Is our ongoing project in our power plant. This is in the outlet canal, discharge canal of the our power plant. We can build the hydrokinetic power plant, and the next maybe in 2022 we can commission this small power plant to in our power station. Other mitigation is efficiency program. We from the year by year we can conduct the efficiency energy program from 2017, 18, 19, 20 is in turbine area, boiler area, condenser area, transformation area, WTP area is around the power plant. We can conduct the efficiency program. This is a decarbonization roadmap in our power plant, and our this 2010, 20,
HSP rehabilitation, boiler rehabilitation, heater rehabilitation, and until 2024 and 40 and 15, we can conduct biomass co-firing higher than now. Conclusion is PJB pattern has been initial decarbonization project, such as a pioneer in co-firing implementation, and also enhancing the use of renewable energy, solar cell, and hydrokinetic. PJB pattern is continually taking best effort to reduce greenhouse gases emission to respond cap and trade and carbon tax scheme. And third one, PJB pattern roadmap has been aligned with government target for carbon neutral. This is all of our presentation. Thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Mariono, for your impressive presentation regarding the decarbonization and climate change action in PT PJB to support net zero emission. All right, ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed to the Q&A session, I'd like to remind you, for those who are not fill up the attendance list, please fill up the attendance list on the chat box. And for those who are already wants to ask, you can submit the question on the chat box also. Okay, we proceed for the next session. I would like to ask first for Ernst Kuneman regarding the ETS itself, right? In your presentation, it said like ETS will be most effective in a liberalized market. But you know, here in Indonesia, the electricity market is still regulated by the government, where the government decide the price to the consumer. If the carbon trading system is implemented, in your last slide also you said like it needs a careful design, especially in combined with indirect emission coverage. What are those included in the emission coverage, and how to minimize its effect to the electricity price for the consumer?
Yeah, many thanks for that question. So overall, like ETS and carbon pricing instruments are highly flexible. And I think the good news is no matter if you're in a system with a liberalized or regulated market, you can make them work. The only difference is that in a fully liberalized market, you can basically introduce a carbon pricing signal without additional regulations, because you basically integrate a market-based price signal in a market. So they're sort of immediately compatible. In a regulated system, you can also integrate a price signal, but you must then consider the interactions that take place and how you can correctly internalize the price signal in the operations of the electricity generators up down the value chain to the end consumer. So on the wholesale part, it is important to look at those two conditions. One, can carbon costs be reflected in the electricity price that generators receive? So can they pass on the carbon costs that they incur in their electricity tariff? And the second is, can some form of competition be included in the dispatch mechanism such that the carbon intensive plants sort of are pushed up the merit order curve that we see also happen in liberalized markets? And there are sort of good instruments to make that happen, for instance, through a green dispatch formula, where you not only look at administrative criteria, but also at allowance costs in sort of the ranking of generator units. But if you do that, yeah?
Just proceed. I'm going to ask later on.
Sure. So if you do that, a green dispatch mechanism, it is important that you combine both that sort of ranking mechanism with a cost recovery component. Since if you assume that a carbon intensive generator is going to run less because of the carbon cost component, it must at the minimum be able to recover that cost. So that's one thing on the wholesale side. On the retail side, there are simply many jurisdictions in Indonesia, it's not the only one, where regulated retail prices are fixed. We also see this in jurisdictions that have sort of established wholesale markets, wholesale trade, and sort of an upstream liberalized segment, but retail is the retail prices are regulated. In those cases, you cannot assume that the electricity price directly increases with the carbon cost component. Therefore, it is likely that the end consumer does not face a direct carbon cost signal. Here, what you can think of is say, well, under an ETS, let's also make big industrial consumers liable for their indirect emissions from electricity consumption, and let's include them in that emissions trading system. It's that way you directly provide a signal to large industrial consumers and ensure that they can sort of look at sort of efficiency measures to make their industrial process less carbon intensive. And Korea has been doing this, and they have built up a lot of experience in that regard. And of course, the main thing, the main issue that should be addressed there is to avoid double counting. So if you have because you would no longer only target direct emissions that come from emissions generation, but you would also include the emissions from electricity consumption by big suppliers or industrial electricity consumers. But it is a principle that has worked, and it might well be feasible in the Indonesian context as well.
So probably when it is implemented, like the ETS system itself, right? The price will not be so effective, very high, right? For the carbon, for the electricity price in the retail, you mean just now? I mean, compared to the Europe electricity system, they're mostly generated by the renewable energy. Here in Indonesia, we are still using the fossil fuel, especially from the coal-fired power plant. So if we implemented this system, like a carbon trading or carbon tax, means it will also add some additional prices to the price in the retail consumer.
Yeah, if a carbon tax or an ETS is introduced that places a direct cost component on carbon intensive electricity generation, the prices will go up. It's inevitable, but it does depend on carbon pricing design. What jurisdictions often do is in the initial stages, they provide free allocation, especially in our emissions trading system, and this will decrease the net cost component that is imposed on carbon intensive producers. So the exact ratio by which the price will increase does depend on how the carbon pricing instrument is designed.
All right. Thank you so much, Ernst, for your impressive answers. Hopefully our government can decide what is the best for the carbon trading system or maybe carbon taxes for in the future in Indonesia. Okay, next maybe I would like to ask to Mr. Mariano. Mr. Mariano, as we know, right, our government has spent the last year preparing for the emission trading system for the future domestic carbon market. The process already has been long ongoing and been discussed in the ministry and also with the president also, but the policy is still not issued by now. But as in your presentation, the PT PJB as the subsidiary of PLN already conducts some decarbonization and climate change action, such as the co-firing. I mean, do you think how is the benefit the co-firing action to support the net zero emission?
Yeah, thank you, Pak Indra. In our presentation, co-firing can positive impact to environmental issue like reducing the SO2, NOx, and others. And there's no impact about the operational activity and our boilers. Now we can try to increasing the co-firing rate, yeah, from initially in 2020 is 1 until 2% of co-firing, and now in 2021 is around 5%, and then maybe in the next year we can increasing co-firing rate to reducing the emission. And the best agenda is maybe we can try to support of government policy of energy mix policy in 2025 around 20%. for the safety of the supply, we try to conduct of plantation. Yeah, we try to conduct of Kalianda plan. This is the I think the name in Indonesia is tanaman energi. Ya, tanaman energi. We conduct about 5,000 until 10,000. Yeah, 5,000 of Kaliandra. We try to kita tanam, Pak Andra. Kita tanam in our land, our free land, ya, in Python. And in this event, from Ministry of Energy and Mineral Resources attend to this event. Is maybe support this our patient, our and to show to the social social environment. PJB very enthusiastic to the environmental issue.
All right, and as we know, Pak Mariono, the co-firing also has some objection from the environmentalists, especially regarding the environmental issue, and how PT PJB handle the environmental issue for the co-firing itself, especially for the destroying, not destroying, like to cut off the plantation itself.
Yeah. Co-firing rate now, yeah, 5% until 10%. Maybe we use the waste of the wood industry, yeah, in around our power station. And for security of the supply, we try to our company, yeah, PJB, to connect with Departemen Kehutanan, yeah, forestry, Department Forest, yeah, to implement of tanaman energy. It is maybe to sustain our supply of co-firing, and in all area, maybe the largest area, yeah, because if we try to higher firing rate of co-firing, need more biomass or sawdust, yeah, to consume in our power plant. Today, 5% until 10%, maybe we can we use the small industry waste, yeah, of the sawdust in area of power plant.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mariono. Before we allow the participant to ask or join the Q&A session, maybe from Ernst and also Mr. Mariono want to ask each other about the topic that we already presented.
Yeah, maybe to Mr. Ernst. Thank you. I'm very interested in your presentation about maybe I want to explain in Indonesia. In Indonesia also follow the policy in the world, net zero emission in 2050 or 60, yeah, and until now, in our opinion, fossil power plant is the highest portion until now, yeah, until now. But I think if the fossil power plant only from especially from coal, I think it's very difficult if not substitute with like a nuclear, yeah, because nuclear is very stable. If in 10 or 15 years, maybe investment from the solar power may be very high, yeah? And then the capacity and the sustainability maybe in Indonesia is not as good as fossil. What's your opinion and in this problem, Mr. Ernst, and for substitute the fossil from to maybe nuclear or thorium power? Thank you.
Thanks a lot for that question. I think it's an interesting one. Yeah, this is more a personal view that I have rather than sort of a broader institutional perspective. But yeah, the challenge of decarbonizing electricity sector is possible, but it's a big one, especially in countries where economic growth is high, where sort of electricity demand is still increasing quite rapidly, and I would say we need all the low carbon technologies that are available. We should not choose between one or the other, but we should basically go all out and see what's possible and try to, be as quick as possible to rapidly upskill and deploy viable low carbon technologies. These include obviously solar, wind power where weather conditions allow, but also nuclear when it's economically feasible and safety concerns can be guaranteed. And I think the good thing is there that a carbon price can really incentivize that process and help and sort of contribute and play a role in the policy package to sort of move towards those low carbon technologies. But I would agree with you, we need all the technologies out there.
Thank you, Mr. Ernst.
All right. Any question, Mr. Mariano or Ernst, for each other? All right. We still have 15 minutes for our discussion session. So I would like to take from some participant here. So the committee already choose, it's only 2 or 3 questions in here. So a question from Mr. Sugeng. Actually, it's already answered by Ms. Aryani, but maybe Ernst can also explain more detail. Mr. Sugeng Priyanto asked regarding what kind of basis should be the carbon tariff and what is the ideal for carbon pricing so that we have standardization.
Is that a question to me, Indra?
Yeah, it's for you. I mean, because
Okay.
Ms. Aryani already left and can answer very properly the question.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's the simple answer is it depends on the context. There's no one single carbon price that will have the same effect across jurisdictions. The abatement incentive that a given carbon price delivers will crucially depend on the other policies, low carbon support policies that are implemented, the relative differences between fuel costs among generation technologies, and the fact to which carbon costs are reflected and sort of form a net cost in generations operational decisions. So there's not a clear-cut answer to that one, and it does require modeling exercises to find out what the right carbon price tax or ETS or price signal is to incentivize certain abatement options. We have seen in Europe, for instance, that under prices of 30 euros earlier in phase 3 of the EU ETS, that fuel switching took place. And now with much higher prices, interestingly, there has been a phase where we have seen a switch from gas plants back to coal, even though we've seen record prices in the EU ETS of above 60 euros. And that really has to do with fuel costs. There's now we're in this energy crunch where gas prices have really skyrocketed, which is then led for increasing coal power demand, for increasing coal power production. So there's always this interaction with the energy market, the broader primary energy markets, but also with the existing policy package.
All right, it means like based on your answer, there's no exact basis for the carbon tax or carbon pricing itself, right? So each country should examine based on their regulation, right? For example, in Indonesia, we cannot use the ETS system and we need to examine based on our regulation itself. Okay, Mr. Sugeng, hopefully it can answer your question. And the second question is from Ahmad Murdani from PLN. The question also asking about what are the best or optimal strategy for market like Indonesia, where most of the power generation are in take or pay contract to apply this carbon tax in the market. PLN is in a vertically integrated power market where all the risk in the price increasing due to carbon tax will be bear by PLN. Any idea where this carbon tax mechanism works well for vertically integrated market like in Indonesia? Maybe Ms. Ernst, you can help for the answer.
Sure, perhaps I'll pass on to my colleagues and then respond to their responses.
Okay, no problem. So, you need a question. Okay, I'm gonna repeat. The question is actually what are the best optimal or strategy for market like in Indonesia, where most the power generator are in the take or pay contract to apply this carbon tax in the market. And the second one is any idea where this carbon tax mechanism works well for vertically integrated market like in Indonesia? Because mostly in Indonesia, PLN is in a vertically integrated power market where all the risk in price increasing due to the carbon tax will be bear by the PLN itself.
Yeah, perhaps I can chime in here. So I think in general, implementing a carbon tax in a vertically integrated system, it simply requires a few additional measures, but it's not impossible. It is very well possible, and a carbon price can still be effective. The important point is that the carbon cost factor is reflected in the daily operations of the power plants, and that there is an economic dispatch principle, if not specifically in a wholesale market setting, then through an additional mechanism that ensures that the ranking system of power plants follows at least some environmental considerations. And these are additional regulations that can also be implemented in a vertically integrated company. I hope that answers the question to some extent, but feel free to follow up if it doesn't.
Okay, thank you, Ernst. Hopefully it can answer the question from Mr. Ahmad Murdani. Okay, before we closing, maybe I still have a question maybe for Ernst, like due to your presentation is only pointed about the ETS, right? And I just curious about why you didn't explain about the carbon tax, like what is the benefit or disadvantage for us if we implemented a carbon tax? What is the difference in ETS and the carbon tax itself? Maybe in general explanation for us, a short one, before we close.
Yeah, sure, I'm happy to.
Yeah.
I would say there are various differences. Like for the power sector, what's important is that there is an integrated carbon price signal, and this can be delivered by both a carbon tax or by an ETS. What matters is sort of the broader objectives that the instrument is trying to that is trying to be achieved with that instrument. An ETS sends a cap on the quantity of emissions that are allowed year on year. By doing that, you create certainty over the emissions outcome, but you do not have exact control over the carbon price that you are imposing on polluting industries. Rather, under an ETS, you let the market decide. You create a market to trade allowances, and you let the market discover the best price for emissions abatement. A carbon tax, on the other hand, you do not set a quantity on emissions, Rather, you say, I want to impose a price level of A, B, or C, and that price level may gradually incline over the years following a certain growth trajectory. So with a carbon tax, you have much more transparency about the price level, about the cost component that the industry can expect, on which they can then base their long-term investment planning and can sort of look in their investment planning on the investments that may or may not become feasible. However, in between those two instruments, you have so-called hybrid systems. So with an ETS, although you do not have direct control over the price level, you can implement market stability mechanisms or specific price ranges in order to increase predictability of the price signal to the participants that it covers. On the other hand, for a carbon tax, you can also think about exemptions and benchmarks that can be traded that will make a tax will push it more towards a spectrum of a tradable system. So there are many variations between the two extremes of an ETS and a carbon tax. Both are highly relevant for the power sector, but it's also a question of what is best for a country at a specific point in time. An ETS is a highly useful instrument, but it is also resource intensive to implement, and it requires additional market institutions to correctly regulate the market and ensure that the instrument is working well. A carbon tax, on the other hand, can be implemented more quickly because it doesn't require so many additional institutions. There are ministries that have experience with implementing taxes that may well take up and be responsible for implementing a carbon tax. So it may in the short term be a more feasible instrument and lay the foundation for a transition to an ETS. And I think it's very promising what Indonesia is planning to do in that regard. Perhaps a final point, whether you implement a carbon tax or an ETS, it is very important to get the MRV right. So the monitoring, reporting, and verification of emissions, because this really provides the backbone of any carbon pricing instrument and will be critical to its success.
All right. Thank you so much, Ernst. So the point is also still like the choice of the instrument, whether the carbon tax or ETS, will depend on our national and economic circumstances, right? Okay, we are approaching to the closing. So I would like to invite all the speakers to give a short closing remarks. Maybe first from Mr. Mariono for your closing remarks. The time is yours. Maybe just 1 or 2 minutes. Please.
Okay. Thank you, Pak Indra. We in PJB, also in Python Power Station, very interest and support to reduce gas reduction of emission to succeed the net zero emission program. And Python Power Station also started to decarbonization program like co-firing biomass in our power plant. And the next year and maybe in the next time, the future, we can support more bigger of the energy mix to our country, especially to Java Bali grid, to produce more green energy to grid. This is maybe in our opinion and my goals in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mariono, and I would like to invite Ernst Minuman to give your closing remarks for this session. Please, Ernst.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important that such a conference is sort of organized on an annual basis to sort of discuss progress that's being made in sort of one of the most important sectors for the climate debate. So I think it's very promising with all the range of complex topics that have been discussed throughout the week here, and it's been a pleasure to have been part of that. I wish the organizers and all my colleagues around the table all the best with progressing with working towards a cleaner energy future.
All right, thank you. Maybe you can invite us for your another event next session. Okay, thank you for all the invited speakers. So hopefully all the material of the presentation will give us some insight for benefit insight for us and also for the Indonesian government to decide whether to implement the carbon tax or maybe a carbon pricing system for the future economic in Indonesia. So Ms. Fania, that's all for our discussion today, and I would like to hand over this session to Ms. Fania. Thank you for all.
Okay, thank you so much for all the speakers and moderators. Well, ladies and gentlemen, now we have arrived at the end of the event, as this is the last conference of the PJB Connect 2021. We would like to thank all of the speakers who given us their knowledge and also the moderators who have guided the activities smoothly. Hopefully, every information and knowledge we get today will be useful for all of us. And thank you all for the participants for attending this conference. The committee will announce the lucky participants who get the door prize on PJB Academy's Instagram. So make sure you check page at PJB_Academy on Instagram. Also, don't forget to stream the closing of PJB Connect 2021 on PJB TV today on 3:30 p.m. And on behalf of the committee from the organizer, we want to apologize if there are any lag or some mistakes during the activities. So thank you for coming and see you in PJB Connect 2022. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Ernst.
Thank you, Ernst. Thank you, Pak Iwan, Pak Mariono.
Thank you, Pak Iwan. Thank you, Mr.
Thank you,
Ernst.
everyone.
Thank you, Mbak Fania.
See you next time.
See you.
Thank you.
See you. Thank you.